Okay. So welcome everyone who's joined us. Appreciate you coming to this first virtual event for PVCA. Obviously with the situation as it is, we wanted to take the opportunity to turn this from an in-person event to a virtual event. There's a lot of great information that Sarah and Andrea are going to be presenting today. So thanks for logging in and joining us. The session is recorded, so we'll post it later on if some friends of yours haven't been able to make it. So I want to thank Sarah and Andrea for joining us today. I also want to send a special thanks to Kat Alden, who's the chair of our community outreach committee, for helping to put this together. She drives a lot of our events, and she was instrumental in helping us pull this together. So thanks to Kat. We'll collect the questions and answers, or the questions as the presentation goes on, and we'll run through those at the end. So feel free to add those into the Q&A section or through the chat, and we'll go through those at the end and let Sarah and Andrea go through those. So we'll do some introductions here. My name is Joshua Brock. For those who I haven't had a chance to meet before, I'm the Director of Operations at PVCA. Kind of the office admin for PVCA. So I'll be running the presentation here today. This is our first one, as I said, so hopefully forgive me if we have a few glitches here. We ran through it twice, and hopefully today will be the best of the three sessions, so we will see how it goes. We have two panelists with us today, Sarah DePasquale and Andrea Ferich. So I just wanted to go through a little bio for each of them. Sarah weaves a background in botany, conservation, and midwifery into her practice as an herbalist specializing in women's and children's health. In 2017, she and her partner Jim founded Fiddler's Bend, which is a 5-acre plant and pollinator sanctuary on Pine Creek and Upper Penns Creek Watershed. There, they strive to manage the land in a way that fosters the health of the soil, water, and native plant and animal communities. With the help of her family, Sarah grows and prepares native and traditional medicines as meadowsweet botanicals, a small batch of herbal apothecary. And we do have a link for her Etsy site, which we'll be passing along when we post the presentation online. Andrea Ferich is a forestry consultant focusing on the implementation of agroforestry systems with private landowners. Ferich is formerly our executive director at Penns Valley Conservation. She has worked in sustainable ag, ecological restoration, and watershed management for the last 20 years from Camden, New Jersey to central Pennsylvania. In 2019, she worked with over 20 landowners to plant 8,000 trees. Currently, she's actively managing 25 acres of agroforestry systems with 20 more collaborative acres, which are in the works. Her focus includes multifunctional riparian forest buffers, hedgerows, windbreaks, silvopasture, alley cropping, and forest farming with no spray techniques and low-cost propagation. She is also on the board of directors for the Pennsylvania Native Plant Society and the Pennsylvania DCNR Riparian Buffer Advisory Board. In 2019, she worked with inventor Gary Gilmore to develop an elderberry destemming machine. And we have a link for her website, Ironwood Forestry, and I will pass that along at the end of the presentation. It'll be in the recorded one as well. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us. I just want to make a note. If you would, and you find this resource valuable, if you consider a donation to PVCA, as you can guess, like most nonprofits or most organizations, most, if not all, of our events have been canceled or delayed for this year. And so there's a number of events that help raise funds for our watershed work, our educational efforts that have been delayed. So if you find it in your heart and you find the information useful, you can head over to our website and click on the Support PVCA donation link. And just as a quick, for those unfamiliar, just want to do a little brief of our mission, which certainly ties into the presentation today. So PVCA, we serve as a steward for the natural and cultural communities in the Upper Penns Creek watershed, seeking to preserve and honor the agricultural roots of Penns Valley by protecting and conserving its waters, farmlands, forest, and rural heritage. We envision an engaged community where growth is balanced with support for healthy natural systems that foster the local economy. Our valley has dark night skies, clear streams, healthy forests, prosperous farms, and local jobs, thanks to folks like Sarah and Andrea and Kat and all those folks who've joined us. So without further ado, we can get started. And I think we're starting with Andrea.
Thanks so much,
Andrea, I already screwed it up, didn't I? Oh,
you
geez.
just call me Annie Pawpaw.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. It's really nice to be here with you all. I wish I could see your faces. It's been such a wonderful last 2 years working on implementing and demonstrating multifunctional riparian forest buffers here in the Upper Penns Creek watershed. Now, the term multifunctional is in front of the term riparian buffer. So what's a riparian buffer? The riparian buffer is basically the trees and shrubs and grass or ground covers adjacent to a waterway, that help to mitigate pollution from entering into the waterway. It's basically a filter area that helps to reduce sediment from flowing into the water and nutrients like nitrogen or phosphorus, and also helps to keep the temperature of the waterway cool, which is very important. And the riparian buffer area also helps to stabilize the stream bank and provides habitat for various terrestrial and aquatic organisms like birds and here trout. Now the term multifunctional, it basically adds a socioeconomic element on top of a layered ecological purpose for these multifunctional buffers. So socioeconomic focuses include herbal, medicinal, edible products grown inside the buffer, and it also includes cut flower species and also different products for nurseries, such as taking cuttings from elderberries and growing plants, or saving nuts and berries and growing out stock. So in 2017, and the end of the year, we received $63,000 grant to demonstrate and assess the economic opportunities of these multifunctional riparian forest buffers in the Penns Valley area as a model for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And in addition to Sarah and Jim's property, I've also been working with a woman named Annie Stubbs in Woodward, who's a chef and caterer. And we've also been growing elderberries and aronia and a variety of different species such as service berries, American plums, pawpaws, persimmons, hazelnuts, chestnuts, hickories, and hardy pecans. And also the cross between hickories and hardy pecans, which are called hicans. I've also been working with a local cut flower grower, Sabina Carey. We planted a riparian buffer at her property last year. Now, most of the cut flower woody stems are imported for the floral industry. We're looking to grow more of those opportunities for Pennsylvania here. Now, working with Sarah and other private landowners, it's really important to really understand what her priorities are and what she's looking for. And as an herbalist, Sarah has really taught me a lot about different native trees and shrubs and ground covers, what she wants to grow and what's important for her. Also, as a beekeeper, we're integrating a lot of different trees and shrubs that are flowering different times of the year, so the bees always have a pollen source. At Sarah's property, we planted 125 elderberry bushes 2 years ago, and you'll see in the video that we made that some of them are over 12 feet tall and producing already. Some were even producing last year. Most of them were 2 to 3 feet tall when we planted them. We also planted a medicinal hedgerow at Sarah's, which integrated a variety of different species that she utilizes in her practice, such as hawthorn, crabapple, American plum, redbud, black locust, to name a few. And we've also integrated some violets as a ground cover for the bees and also for the edible properties. The cut flowers that we're growing in different systems include a variety of different silky and red osier dogwood species, pussy willows, spice bush, redbud, witch hazel, and hazelnut. The hazelnuts and a few of the nut species have been selected from the wild by different horticulturalists at different long-standing forest farms and different places in the mountains for their value and productivity. So the hazelnuts themselves have a large nut. They ripen around the same time, and they're easy to shell, and they're tasty. Some of the chestnuts and pecans and hickories were collected from the J.W. Hershey Farm, one of America's premier forest farms that was planted in the 1920s through the 60s. In Downingtown, Pennsylvania, there was a forest farmer who during, right before the Great Depression, he was sent to collect a variety of different nuts and fruits from the mountains of North Carolina and the Tennessee Valley. And he brought them back to Downingtown where they've been growing. But unfortunately, his forest farm was never preserved and he died rather suddenly. So when you go down there to collect buckets of black walnuts that are this big and tasty and easy to shell, you have to run between townhouses and have buckets full of nuts through parks. And, you know, the Multifunctional Riparian Forest Buffer Initiative is about growing these products, but it's also about connecting the supply with the demand. And out of this initiative, there's been the Keystone Nut Cooperative, which is being developed with a few nut specialists around, and we're focusing on hazelnut and bitternut hickory and chestnut. And then Josh also mentioned the elderberry destemming machine. You know, a lot of people have stories of their families. You know, Uncle Joe used to make elderberry wine and Mom had elderberry pie. And as the hedgerows and the riparian buffers disappeared, a lot of those elderberry bushes disappeared. And a lot of people have elderberries around, but aren't necessarily thinking of it as an agricultural crop. But a lot of the limiting factor in elderberry production is the time that it takes to remove the elderberries off of the stem. So this elderberry destemming machine was based around a model out of Missouri and an elderberry cooperative there where the machine shakes the elderberries off of their stem, and we can process what used to take 4 or 5 hours in about half an hour. We can do about 25 pounds of elderberries. And there's really a tremendous market around elderberries now. The winery here in Milheim, Pisano's Winery, bought elderberries from us. Elderberry syrup is another tremendous opportunity. The Amish community is really excited about participating in growing in fruits and nuts. And I'm just terribly excited about what Sarah's doing and continuing to learn from her and finding ways to really build more of a movement around reclaiming our marginal places with high economic, easily propagated species such as elderberry. So at Sarah's house, we also planted aronia, which is similar to elderberry for its antiviral properties. It's another native fruit. And the main difference between elderberry and aronia, in my experience as a forester, is that the aronia doesn't do well with the black walnuts. So in forestry and forest management, walnut trees really are dominant, one of the dominant species in riparian areas, and there's a lot of trees and shrubs that don't do well with the black walnuts. So in the places where there aren't black walnuts, that's where I like to plant the aronia. And American plums are also sensitive to the black walnuts. Yeah, so I think that that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Yeah, I can answer, specific questions about riparian buffers and agroforestry and the multifunctional aspects and opportunities moving forward during the question and answer time. I'd like to turn it over to Sarah.
Hi. I think Josh is going to start some video that Andrea took of our farm. So when that starts up, I'll start to talk about what we've planted and where. That's a picture of the riparian buffer when it flooded, for those of you who weren't on earlier in the call. So that is where we planted elderberries. The elderberries in that picture are submerged. This was about 1.5 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And pretty soon we're going to see, here we are. Here he goes. So this is a video that Andrea took of our farm. Behind me is the creek. As Josh mentioned, our farm is 5 acres along either side of Pine Creek. It wraps around the land, which is where I'm indicating there. There is a great diversity of habitat here. About 2.5 acres is what would be considered actually farmable. It's sunny, arable pasture and gardens. And that's where we're standing in this video. We love this diversity, both for the wildlife that it supports and because it offers a lot of opportunity to grow the plants that I work with in my practice. This one that I'm looking at is red raspberry. It's a native, which everyone knows for its fruit. We also harvest and dry the leaves for tea. And we planted 4 varieties of raspberry this spring as part of the grant. This next bed that I'm walking to is Ellie Campaign, the root of which offers deep respiratory support. I like to make an herbal honey from the root. Not everyone loves it. It's pretty strong tasting. We also keep honeybees, so many of the plants that we grow here end up being preserved in raw honey, which goes over pretty well with my 3-year-old. These will get really tall, like as tall as a person, with these nice sunny yellow flowers. There's marshmallow down at the end, which also gets tall. They offer shade for the black cohosh, which is growing in this bed behind him. These are first-year black cohosh plants. They're a native woodland species, which we planted this spring. So it'll be 3 years before I dig the root to tincture in alcohol. And that tincture finds its way into many of the postpartum and menopausal remedies that I make, as well as cough syrup. As I mentioned, they're a woodland species, so they do appreciate a little bit of filtered sunshine. It's nice for them that the Ellie Campaign and the marshmallow will grow up to shade them as the sun moves south after the solstice. And right now, in the peak of summer, the black walnut trees above them offer shade. So again, we really like having such a diversity of habitat to grow so many different things. I think we're ready for the next video now. I mentioned that was the sort of sunny arable garden part, and the remainder of the land is a combination of low-lying stream bank and woods. And here we're standing under a row of mature black walnut trees which border Pine Creek. We were excited to get to work with Andrea and PVCA on this project. In the 2 areas she mentioned, we planted a native hedgerow along the southern border of the land to extend the bird and insect habitat from the woods and the creek, and then also planted the riparian buffer along the south side of Pine Creek, between the creek and these walnuts. On many farms, black walnut trees are not considered an asset. They have an allelopathic action, which means that they can suppress the growth of plants around them, but we love them. The green husk of the mature nut offers strong antimicrobial properties, and we just grow plants near them that aren't affected by the allelopathic action. Plus, I think it's just really important to work with what you have and to appreciate what the land has to offer without strict management. We feel that we are stewards of the land and it has a soul and a life that goes beyond our intentions for it. So here I'm continuing to talk about black walnut, but I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that at the time of European contact, this land was inhabited by the Susquehannock people, who probably also loved the land and did not choose to leave it. And also to acknowledge that all over the world, there are people with limited access to land and clean water, and that in many communities in this country, community members have no ownership or agency. And this is disproportionately true for people of color. So our land ownership is a privilege and a luxury. And as we live here and farm, we carry that knowledge as a responsibility to care for the land and also to work actively to dismantle the systemic injustice that has allowed us a privilege that isn't available to everyone. Here I'm talking about a great big black walnut tree that's on the other side of the creek. So it's important to us that the land is a plant and pollinator sanctuary. We're trying to remove the invasive plants and also to plant at-risk native species. We don't use herbicide or insecticide or fungicide. We're in the process of deciding if it's also a groundhog sanctuary. That's a little more difficult. They are eating our raspberries, makes it hard. Next, the third video, we're gonna go down on the other side of those black walnuts to the riparian area along the creek. So here we are with the elders. This is the wetland south of the creek. It's about 6 feet lower than the land we were just standing on in the previous video. It floods every year, at least once for several days. And this was the area that was the focus of the riparian buffer installation that Andrea was talking about. As she said, she planted hundreds of elderberry and aronia plants, as well as some other native species that can thrive in the conditions that are offered here, which are partial sun, moist soil, and occasional flooding. You'll see as we walk through that there are clusters of grass and twigs on some of the stems of the elders, and those are the deposits at the top of the flood level from the heavy rains and flooding that we had at the end of April this year. And they go up to chest height, some of them. If I see any in the video, I'll try to point them out close up. So it was great to be able to utilize this lowland to plant shrubs which help to shade the creek and filter the water, but also offer so much food and medicinal value. I make an elderberry syrup, which is a remedy that many people are familiar with. There's a lot of good research around its effectiveness in helping the body to fight the flu and boost immunity in general. So in August, I'll be back out here again, harvesting elderberry clusters to juice and to freeze and to make syrup with. But here we're harvesting elderflowers. This is a great year for elderflower, everybody. I see it blooming everywhere beautifully right now. There are some things to consider when you're harvesting any plant. You want to be a good distance from a road. I like to go at least 25 feet from a busy paved road. And even on less traveled roads, if they're dirt or gravel, you want to make sure you're far enough away so that you're not collecting a bunch of dust with your plants. You also want to make sure that the land you're harvesting from is unsprayed. And of course, if it's private, you want to get the landowner's permission. I always bring clippers, like you see in this video, in a basket. The clippers to make a clean cut, and I harvest into a basket or a cloth or paper bag rather than plastic. You can watch any of these 3 videos with their sound on Andrea's Instagram account. We talk about a little bit of different stuff. I'm having a little love affair here with this particular elder plant. something that I find to be really important when I'm out harvesting plants for food or for medicine is to be very mindful, to bring my full awareness to what I'm doing and to be clear in my intention with the plants, to ask permission and be receptive to what they might offer or not offer. There, can you smell it? And to remember to express gratitude for what they do for us. So here, elderflower bloom around the summer solstice, and they absolutely embody summer to me. The smell is wonderful. It's earthy and sunny at the same time. Traditionally, elderflower is known as a remedy for fevers and for upper respiratory infections. The action is diaphoretic, which means that it can induce sweating to help the body work through fever so that the fever can be effective. Energetically, it's said to help move and release heat in the body. So great for those dry, hot fevers that just don't seem to break. My son, whenever he spikes a fever, whenever he has an illness, he gets a really, really high fever. So like 103 degrees from teething. And elderflower has been a really valuable remedy for us in his infancy and childhood. I'm very grateful for her help. Also, it can help to move emotional heat. So to release that sort of hot under the collar feeling, it's great for that. And now I'm gonna try to adjust my camera a little bit and you'll tell me if it looks about right. Because we are going to make an elderflower syrup. And we're in my summer kitchen. Welcome to the summer kitchen. This is where I do a lot of the herbal preparation. And I almost always forget something in the kitchen. So if I have to leave to collect a tool that I didn't remember to bring, maybe Andrea can tell you some jokes or something.
Sarah, just when you turn away from the computer, can you just really talk loud?
Oh, sure, yes. I will also, I might be able to move it just a little bit closer and have you still be able to see. Andrea, just keep me posted.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
We do. So these are some elderflower that I harvested this morning. The ones that Andrea and I collected the other day, I dried for tea. I wanted these fresh for today. When I harvest, like I said, I like to cut them directly into a basket. And then I usually leave them for an hour or so, maybe a little less, maybe a little more time to make some tea. And I like to put them on a piece of cloth like this. I have an old tablecloth to let the bugs run away from them. Flowers attract bugs. That's part of their job. So giving them some time, giving the bugs some time to run off is a good idea. So I let them sit. And then with both elderberry and elderflower, Andrea mentioned the destemmer. You really do want to try to remove as much of the stem as possible. It's not hard. It takes some time to do, but it's not hard to do. You just kind of run your fingers along the stems like this. If you have a COVID-19 social pod, you can get everyone together to pick the elderflowers off into a basket. So you just kind of pull. It's okay if you get a little bit of the stem, but you don't want to get a whole lot in your remedy. It's not super helpful and it's a little bit bitter as well. I don't wash most of the herbs that I collect, particularly elderflower. If you wash these, you're going to lose a lot of the pollen, which is some of the wonderful stuff about them. So again, you want to just make sure that you're collecting from a clean area, not too dusty, not sprayed, that you don't have anything that you really do need to wash off of them. I already picked most of these so that you didn't have to spend 45 minutes watching me pick elderflower. Here's a great big beautiful cluster that I think I can hold up so you can see what you're looking for. When you're picking them, you want to find clusters that are mostly intact. They even have some of these little tiny buds that aren't open yet. If you place your hand on a stem to cut it and a bunch of the flowers fall off, that stem is probably a little bit too mature. That's okay, but you wouldn't want a whole lot falling off. And if you find some that have some of the flowers still closed, that's a great way to do it. So this one I'm just going to leave as our mascot right now. Once I have collected most of the flowers, all of the flowers into the basket, what I do to make this syrup, we're making an elderflower syrup, which is medicinal, but it's also culinary. You don't have to have a fever to use this elderflower. In fact, one of my favorite commercial products is Saint Germain, which is a liqueur made from elderflowers. And it is, you can get it at most liquor stores, but it's actually, I think, a really high quality product and pretty nice. So let me make sure that my hot plate is on here. Once you get all of the elderflowers picked from the stems, you're going to make a strong tea with them. With flowers, most flowers and most fresh plant material, I don't like to shock them completely with boiling water. I like to have it just off the boil a little bit. So just like when I'm harvesting, when I'm making stuff, I really try to avoid plastic. You see this pretty well. I have just a regular mason jar here and a canning funnel. And I'm going to use the canning funnel to pack the flowers in to the jar. This is about maybe 20 elderflower clusters. 18 to 20, depending on size, is about what you would want. Really can't find it right now. That's a pine cone. So 18 to 20 will make about a quart, I would say, of tea. Pack them in. One of the reasons that you want to put them on fabric like this is to make sure that you're collecting as much of the pollen as possible. You can also see to help the bugs out if they didn't get away on their own. So here we go. The flowers in. And then once you have those flowers in a quart canning jar, you'll just fill that with almost boiling water and then cover it so that the volatile oils don't escape. Much of what we're looking for in plants and much of the flavor in plants comes from the volatile oil. So you want to keep that. It'll condense and then drip down from the plate on top of it. And through, so you would just pour the hot water in there. Through the magic here of the silver screen, I have some elderflower tea that I made a few hours ago. So this is about how long you'd want it to steep. Can you see the beautiful color as the sun comes through it? It's this great sunshiny lemon color. This has steeped long enough that it's not really warm to the touch anymore. That's about what you want. You wouldn't see any steam coming out. There's a little water that's condensed on the bottom of the cover, but you're looking for a pretty cool solution. So I have a quart of strong elderflower tea, and then a measuring cup, a pretty fine screen, and then on top of that I've put this is organic cotton muslin. You could also use cheesecloth, but you'd want to use like a butter muslin, a pretty high quality cheesecloth with a fine weave so that you didn't have any of this come through. Won't hurt you, but it's nice to have a clean product. Pull that out. And then we'll strain it out and see what you get. So from that quart, I have about 3 cups of strong tea, which is about what I expected. When you're making a medicinal syrup, you can use really any kind of sugar. I will often use honey, and for example, when I make elderberry syrup, I always use honey. I only use honey. With elderflower syrup, the scent and the flavor is so difficult that there is a good argument for using sugar, which is a more neutral sweetener. It also depends what you want it for. If it's a purely medicinal syrup, it doesn't matter if it only tastes like honey, but if you're really looking for the flavor for like cocktails or mocktails, then it's not a bad idea to use sugar. Also, sugar is much easier to measure when you're doing something on screen. So you're gonna take the amount of tea that you had. I had 3 cups, and you're gonna add an equal amount of sweetener, either honey or sugar. I have this measure, but I have exactly 3 cups here because that's about what I expected. And you're gonna add equal amount of sweetener to the amount of tea that you came up with, and then I'm gonna put it here on my hot plate. I try to make sure that I don't cook this flower tea. You just want to heat it up enough that the sugar will dissolve. You don't really want to cook it longer. Some people will add lemon to this. It's good that way. I don't add lemon. I prefer simpler concoctions. I like it when it's just elderflower. Sometimes if I use the syrup for something, I'll add a little bit of fresh lemon juice to it, but I don't find lemon juice in a jar to really taste very good. So I'd rather add it fresh. While that's heating up, I'll just show you some of the things. This is an elderflower syrup that I made 2 years ago, and I made this with honey. You can see that it's very much the color of honey, although that's about what color this is going to turn out to be, I think. So you can your elderflower syrup. I would have done this the way that you would can any kind of jam or jelly, just without the thickener. So you'd bring it to a boil, pour it into sterilized jars, add sterilized lids, and then can it in a boiling water bath, and it will keep for quite a long time. If you don't need it to keep a long time, if you know you're going to use it right away, it's better probably not to cook it that long. Today, I'm probably just going to put this in this old vermouth bottle with a cork and put it in the refrigerator. When I make things for sale or for gifts, I usually put them in these syrup bottles. I would sterilize this bottle, sterilize this metal funnel, pour the hot boiling syrup into the bottle, cap it, and then just put it in a boiling water bath for a second. Since I'm giving it to other people, I want to make sure that it's going to keep if they don't get to it right away. And that's helpful. This syrup can be great. As I mentioned, you can put a tablespoon or 2 with fizzy water for a great drink. You can add it to cocktails. You can use it sometimes if someone, especially a child, but not necessarily a child, has a fever, you can make a popsicle out of it. And sometimes when they won't eat or drink much else, they'll consent to a popsicle that has this wonderful sweet syrup in it. It's really delicious. I also mentioned when we were looking at the video that in addition to helping the body to move heat through, it was traditionally used as a remedy for eruptive childhood illnesses. So measles, chicken pox, those things that really have a visible eruption of heat in the body, those are rashy, and then the hot, dry fevers. And I also mentioned it can be useful for emotional eruption, for helping to clear emotional heat. So it's nice that it's tasty, because it can be a great ally when you're working through something and you just need to sit down and have a cup of tea or have some fizzy water and try to work emotional difficulties out. I would say that of all the remedies that I work with in my practice currently for my little 3-year-old, who we call a little fire spirit, Elderflower is the one that he takes to most directly. He's a fiery little personality, and Elderflower can kind of keep that flowing, and it's just lovely. It's so easy to take. It's not that Ellie campaign honey that I mentioned earlier that's bitter and difficult and tastes like medicine. This doesn't taste like medicine at all. I want to show you over here. These are some of the elderflowers that I was collecting the other day when Andrea took the video. So these are dry now. I dry them on the clusters because they come off even more easily when they're dry, and you can just kind of pick them off and put them in a jar to dry. So these are a nice tea. I always try to put some of these away for winter. And a very traditional fever and illness tea is elderflower and yarrow and peppermint. So I always try to make sure I have some of those on hand. I don't know if you can see all the beautiful pollen. Now, I don't think you can really see it. There's all this beautiful pollen that's come off of here. So when I'm done putting the elderflowers in the jar, I'll probably try to poof that pollen all over my face or something, use it somehow. Once this is, looks like it is, once this is dissolved, I'll just take it, excuse me, right away. Maybe you can see it as it pours. It still has that beautiful yellow color. I'm not going to fill the whole thing because I want the jar to have a chance to temper. But that's it. You would just fill it up and cork it and put it in your refrigerator and use it within a month or so. Or if you wanted to go to the trouble to put it in a sterilized syrup jar or canning jar and can it, it would keep sort of indefinitely. And like I said, you could add about a tablespoon or two to a drink or popsicles, probably with these that I just picked. We're gonna make ice cream later on. So I'll warm up some milk and steep these in milk for a couple of hours. I promised my kid that we would have strawberry pie and ice cream before strawberry season was over. So that's what we'll do. Yeah, happy harvesting and happy creating. I think that's it. Questions?
Wow, thanks, Sarah. That was amazing.
Cool.
Yes, well done.
You learned so much. It was so beautiful.
I didn't even spill anything yet.
So we do have 2 questions so far. We have Ethan sent one through the Q&A. He says, I have 13 acres in Pine Creek, runs right off of Blue Heron and Woodward. We have some invasives. Is there a program we can enroll in to help remove invasives and replace with beneficials natives for pollinators to encourage herbs and other wildlife?
Yeah, well, actually, Ethan, I'm your neighbor, and I believe you're down at where Warren and Tina used to live there, and PVCA is funding me to go around and do assessments at riparian properties. We're targeting primarily areas that rank very high with lots of invasives and a variety of different inputs with, you know, agricultural land uses adjacent to it. But I'd love to hop down there and take a look at it with you and give you some feedback. There are some NRCS cost share programs for invasive removal. You can check out the USDA NRCS CREP program, or you can send me an email at andreaferich@gmail.com and I'll come over and take a look at it with you. A lot of the invasive species management that I've been doing is either weed whacking or sheet mulching with plastics or cardboard to kill the species. Some other landowners are also putting metal cans on top of their stems. But if it is a situation where you might need a jump start over the invasives, there is one invasive management specialist that I work with named Art Gover, who has a really fine finesse on the amount of spraying that he does and species identification. So send me an email, andreaferich@gmail.com, and I'll come out and take a closer look at it with you. There is funding currently available as well if you have at least 1 acre and we can put in at least a 35-foot buffer. There's funding available for all riparian landowners to do multifunctional riparian buffers. We can do all sorts of fruits and nuts, and I can tell you about that more. And this goes for anybody between here and Lancaster. I'll stop in and take a look at your buffer with you.
Great, awesome. The next one is from Kat. She says, how do you prevent mold in your syrups with honey?
That's a great question. So mold is the thing that you always have to worry about with your herbal preparations. I would either make sure that you're canning it, so the jar is sterile, the lid is sterile, the syrup is boiling when you put it in the jar, and then you put it in a boiling water bath, process it, and then it's like any kind of jelly or jam. It's sterile in there and it has an indefinite shelf life, and then you use it within a month or so. Once you open it, you put it in the fridge and use it within a month or so. That's not hard to do with this stuff. If you are finding that you're getting a lot of mold in your product, honey is not more prone to mold than sugar. It just depends on the concentration of sugar in your product. And I tend to not put so much sugar that the sugar preserves it. If you find that you're eating a lot, you just have to make sure that you're keeping it cooler and using it up in a certain amount of time. Hopefully that answers that question.
Great, thanks. So the next one's from Carla, and it's 2 questions. I think one will go to Sarah and one's for Andrea. First one is, did you make syrup from the tea? And then her second question is, how do you find out about available grants?
Okay, I did make syrup from the tea. So I had the tea in here that had been steeping a couple hours till it was cool. And then I poured that through the strainer. I had the tea, I measured it. I measured the tea into this pot, and then I added an equal amount of sugar to the tea and just cooked long enough to dissolve the sugar. And that's the syrup.
So my first question, Carla, maybe you can respond. What county do you live in? Are you local to Center County? If you're in Pennsylvania, oh, you're in Virginia. And if you own the property, the first thing I would suggest would be to reach out to your county conservation district. I'm not sure if that's the language that it's called in Virginia. I've never worked in Virginia. If anybody else has information, maybe Tracy Coulter wants to chime in on this. But the USDA NRCS CREP program, CREP or CRP, they have funding available for all variety of different land management practices, riparian buffers, hedgerows, windbreaks, high tunnels, invasive management, forest farming. So reach out to maybe the cooperative extension. I know Virginia Tech has a lot of great resources for these multifunctional riparian forest buffers. And then the federal agency, the NRCS, out of the USDA, just go to their website. There's sort of a divide of different types of cost share programs. It depends on whether your land has been in agricultural practices or not. There's different funding available. There's funding for doing pollinator gardens. I think the Virginia Native Plant Society likely has some resources available as well.
Great, wonderful. And a question from Lacey. Lacey asks, can you freeze the syrup?
You can freeze the syrup. It will expand just like water would expand. So if you're going to freeze it in a jar, I would maybe freeze them on its side like this. And that's actually a nice way to do it because then you're not cooking it too much. This is much better the less you cook it. You could even freeze it in ice cube trays and add ice cubes to things. That just depends on your freezer space.
Okay, awesome. Any more questions either through the chat or the Q&A?
I did want to mention that the grant that we got through the Chesapeake Bay Trust, they might have some more funding available if you reach out to your local conservation organization. If there's, you can always do your own grant research. Just start doing internet searches. Type in every combination of things. You can find private funding sometimes with organizations like the Chesapeake Bay Trust or your equivalent to DCNR, which is like your forestry department down there. So yeah, that sort of goes for everybody. And organizations like Penns Valley Conservation Association, are excited to be partners with a variety of different public, private organizations and agencies here as we continue to grow towards our mission.
Okay, great. Let's see. Tracy just put a note in the chat. Also in Virginia, possible to also check with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay or Department of Forestry for buffer guidance and support. So just a note on that. I'm not seeing any more questions come through.
Yeah, Loanne wanted us to look at the slideshow again.
Oh, sure. Let me see if I can bring that back
We have
up.
a little bit more time. Maybe we could even talk a little bit about what's there.
Yeah.
Yep, let me bring that back up here. Let me start it back from the beginning. That's coming back up.
Yep.
Okay.
Elderflower. And that's in our buffer last summer.
One of the ways that you can, okay, so these are J.W. Hershey nuts. That's a black walnut in my right hand there.
Wow.
And persimmons, heart nuts, pecans, hickories, and chestnuts that were gathered and collected by J.W. Hershey in the 1920s, just prior to the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, brought back to Downingtown. So I have all of this. I've been collecting seeds, and I have a nursery in Woodward where I've been growing out a lot of these species for restoration and different buffer projects.
Andrea, Susan asks, is there a minimum waterway size for riparian buffer work?
For grant funding, usually it's an acre. So 35 feet wide on both sides comes out to about 1,250 feet long if you have a 70-foot wide buffer. That's about a buffer acre. That was the day the elderberries came.
Hooray! Those are elderberries that I harvested. This is hawthorn, which is one of the species we planted in the hedgerow, the medicinal hedgerow on the south side of our property. This is passion flower. It's hard to believe, but that is a native, Passiflora incarnata, Pennsylvania native, which we grow. It's a beautiful tall vine. Skullcap, which is also a native understory herb, kind of like mint, but shyer than mint. Echinacea purpurea. And there's my mom harvesting nettles. Here's the day that our fence went in. We had a little play group.
They work really hard.
Yeah, you should see those kids with hammers.
Wow.
And that's the buffer as the fence is going in.
Yeah, so there's an electric fence at Sarah's.
Mm-hmm.
This is a silvopasture project at Jill and Scott Buchanan Patterson's in Woodward, integrating black locust planting and sugar maple and elderberries around a grazed pasture where their neighbor leases the land for cattle or shares the land there. It's one way to manage invasives as well, Ethan. Get some goats on that.
Andrea, Josh Cohen asks, do you do plant cuttings or plants that already have roots? Oh, do you plant cuttings or plants that already have roots for your riparian buffer projects?
Yeah, sometimes a lot of the live staking that we do is in springtime while the species are still dormant. So there's a flower florist in our community, the Heaney's, and when they prune back their variety of dogwoods and pussy willows, I go and get their cuttings and stick them in the ground in wet areas, and they'll grow roots. So there's DCNR has a live stake cooperative out of Susquehanna University with the Chesapeake Conservancy, and you can get part of this team where we go around different places, take cuttings from alders and elderberries and different kinds of willows, and then share them. But elderberries, we've had a lot of success taking cuttings with usually 2 nodes. And the farm where I live, there's horses, so the elderberries just really thrive as cuttings straight in the ground in composted horse manure, where you can soak your cuttings first. And black willow or any kind of willow is a really good natural rooting hormone. You can cut up black willows and mix it in with your water where your cuttings are soaking as they're rooting. So there's the spread of nuts at the J.W. Hershey farm in Downingtown. Some wild collected pawpaws from near where I grew up in southern Lancaster County. They're on their way to becoming pawpaw brandy. Yum.
Andrea, Josh had a follow-up. He says 2 nodes on the entire elderberry cutting or 2 nodes above the ground?
The cutting that you're making should have 2 nodes on it. I have some videos on my Instagram page on how I did it. I like to have 1 or 2 nodes in the ground or in the water soaking. Would you say that's what you do as well, Sarah?
Yeah, two nodes below the ground is good, and maybe not that much above seems to work well for me.
Yeah, like 6 inches, 6 to 8 inch lengths.
Mm-hmm.
There's my dad and I collecting macroinvertebrates at Sarah and Jim's place in the waterway to see what sort of impact we're having on water quality. This is our baseline assessment before. There's Annie Stubbs, and we're processing elderberries, wild collected elderberries at in her kitchen. She's a baker and a chef, and she makes syrup as well. I planted the sycamores there. They grew that much in about a month. That's at Annie's. There's trees and shrubs that I got from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. They have the Keystone 10 Million Tree Initiative, where they're planting 10 million trees in Pennsylvania in 10 years. And I got a few thousand, 3,000 trees and shrubs from them last year for free, and trees, tubes and stakes for deer protection. And then I think it was about 1,500 this fall. I'm collaborating with a landscaper. A few different landscapers put together an order of about 6,000 trees and shrubs for the fall on about 26 acres of riparian buffers. There's me and a wild American chestnut tree. Persimmon gravy from J.W. Hershey Farm. Wild ginseng. If anybody's interested in ginseng, I sell ginseng seed, usually in the fall. And we had really high germination rates with the people that planted it. Not near riparian buffer though. If you have species like sugar maple and Ostraya virginiana, those are the types of calcium-rich soils you're looking for. They like to grow in the forest, in the shade, or a simulated type situation. There's our elderberry destemming machine. I think we're gonna offer services where I come around with it and do the destemming for you, or maybe have destemming days where you can bring your elderberries. We also we'll have machines for sale. I think they're gonna be about $500. There's a built-in motor on them. Elderberry wine from Pisano's Winery, made from our local elderberries. We also planted 800 black raspberry bushes with the winery this year. They're looking to make a variety of different native fruit wines.
There's my mom and my kid and I in the area where the first video took place, actually, up where we now have planted raspberries and blueberries as part of this project. Great big beautiful elder.
If you're looking around for wild elderberries to cultivate, one of the things that I've found in the cultivars, which are cultivated varieties that you can buy, is that you're looking for elderberry clusters that are drooping down. They say that those are more beneficial for propagating because the birds are less likely to just sit on top and eat all the berries. You're also looking for wild elderberry bushes that ripen at the same time, with just for ease of propagating or harvesting. And again, you can take cuttings. I usually do most of my cuttings in March. and then plant them out in April. I like to soak mine in water. Don't eat them raw.
Here we are up close looking at him. Now he just wants to stay inside and play with dinosaurs. They grow up so fast.
Andrea, Kat asks, why not eat raw? Why not eat them raw?
Well, Sarah can probably answer this better than I can. I think it's arsenic in the elderberries.
Arsenic is more common in the stone fruits, cherries and apples and stuff. I'm actually blanking on the compounds in elder. It'll come to me after this.
Yeah.
That is why you don't eat the stems. They're highest in both the seeds and the stems. I know plenty of people who eat their body weight in raw elderberries and have since childhood, and kind of scoff at you when you tell them that, but that is the wisdom, that is the recommendation around elderberry, that you cook them first. So if you destem them and you cook them so that you've cooked the seeds, then that neutralizes that toxin that I can't remember the name of right now. Yeah, so there's the buffer where we've been walking. Those pictures of Jim and Ryan and I walking are down in that area that's underwater in this picture. And the elder don't mind it at all. And that's where we planted our hedgerow. This is the southern border of our property. You can see our neighbors really like to mow and we don't really like to mow. So you can see right down the edge where we planted. A whole bunch of species: hawthorn, redbud, black locust, American plum, crabapple. What am I forgetting? That might be it.
Kat made a note. She says raw elderberries are known to be toxic. They contain a cyanide-inducing glycoside.
That's right. It's a
Yeah.
glycoside. Yeah.
Cooking elderberries releases this toxin, making them perfectly safe.
But again, you'll talk to a lot of people who spent their childhood eating raw elderberries and live to tell the tale. So that's up to you.
Sarah, sheep mulching. What we did was we got really long rolls of cardboard and rolled them out as a weed suppressant, and then mulched them and planted into the buffer, into the hedgerow. We put those tree tubes on at first and then moved to wider cages. We just had the tree tubes available and wanted to protect them immediately. Sort of experimented with a different variety of types of fences and widths. And it really blows my mind how fast they grew. They loved it there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's you can see a couple different types of cages there. That's still in Sarah's hedgerow. Is everything growing in?
Yep. The red bud and a crabapple and a black locust. So you can see the idea. It's a double row along the border, and the idea is that these can hopefully grow together to form sort of a straight line thicket from the woods and the creek out along the border of our property.
We followed the prescription that Xerces Society had, I believe, planting 80% the width of what is normally recommended to get a closer, shrubbier growth habit structure.
Milkweed.
There's being some bluebells. That's a riparian buffer area in Lancaster. That's like all bluebells and pawpaws.
Wow.
I like to visit the natural ecosystems that we're trying to replicate as much as possible. There's Annie Stubbs' house. That's before in her riparian buffer. You can see it was row crops of vegetables, and that was in the fall of 2018 when everything was just sopping wet. The farmer couldn't even get in there. It was an Amish farmer leasing the floodplain for a vegetable farm, and he couldn't even get his tomatoes to the market before they were exploding from all the water that we had. It was just such a wet year. And you can sort of see that's the after. And in the buckets there, it's a variety of different cut flowers, the woody stems that we use for live staking. So there's red osier dogwood and a variety of different silky dogwoods and pussy willow. And yeah, so for me as an agroforester, one of the top 3 reasons why a landowner might plant a riparian buffer is just because they're beautiful. Really try to make them as beautiful as possible. And we did alley cropping between the tree tubes, between the rows. In the alleys, we filled them with sunflowers. So you'll see some of these sunflower pictures coming up next.
Alice asks, can you suggest any beneficial plant and tree combinations that together help each other establish and do well? In particular, I'm interested in plants that do well with or help elderberry.
I plant aspens everywhere that I can. A lot of the language and literature around the mycorrhizal network of the trees and shrubs that are growing says that the different nutrients are shared between trees and shrubs in an area through their root system. And some of the literature says that newly planted trees and shrubs don't necessarily tap into that network, but that there's some research that aspens help to tap into that network. With elderberries, I haven't really come across anything. The University of Vermont has really great resources for how to grow for production with the proper spacing that you want if you're specifically focused on integrating rows of elderberries into your planting scheme. They do well with walnuts. You know, they're not sensitive to the allelopathic properties. I sort of integrate American plums and hazelnuts and witch hazel into the scheme. I haven't really found anything in the literature that really makes any strong recommendations. Does anybody else have anything that they've come across that does well specific to elderberries?
I would say that elderberry like each other. They like to grow with other elderberry. So whereas with some plants, you really want to have a sort of a diversity. I mean, it's great to have a diversity with elderberry as well, but they don't mind growing in a big cluster of elderberry the way that for some plants that are more prone to pests and diseases, you might want to separate them. Elderberry like to be with elderberry. And they like almost any conditions, I would say, as long as there's enough moisture. They can grow in full sun. They can grow in full shade as long as they have some space and some moisture to grow. Is that your experience as well, Andrea?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have a small area, you really want to make sure you're pruning your elderberries because they're early successional. They like to walk and migrate. And you know, I'm in a few elderberry groups on social media, and somebody was showing their elderberries. They cut them down to 8 inches the end of every winter, and then they're 12 feet tall by flowering time. Yeah, so the elderberries do fine with the black walnuts.
Mm-hmm.
But check out the University of Vermont. Just type in University of Vermont elderberry production, and there's a 100-page PDF that breaks down the cultivars, it breaks down spacing, a variety of different practices, and the ecological and socioeconomic aspects of the species.
There's another question from Carla. She asked, do you feed your elderberries nutrients?
I don't, because they flood seasonally, and I anticipate that most of the waterways around here are more nutrient rich than probably they ought to be. I depend on that seasonal flooding to deposit nutrients in among the elderberries. I actually intend, as part of our management, to try to remove some of the nutrients from the grass growing around the elderberries in that buffer, to maybe mow that out, take it out and compost it up above. They don't need particularly rich soil to thrive. What they really need is moisture.
Yeah, when I planted 75 1-gallon elderberry pots at Annie Stubbs this spring, and when I got them from the nursery grower, he said cut them back about 2/3. So I left about 1/3, and they were shooting out of the bottom of the pot. They were growing as big as it was really amazing. And you know, our friends down at Village Acres start elderberries from seed. They've had success doing that. When I'm doing live staking, I like to use a nutrient-rich composted horse manure. But in terms of, you know, mulching with leaves, we get free leaves from our municipality here. You know, just trying to reduce the competition, and exactly what Sarah said. Some of the areas I'm doing some companion planting with black locust, which fixes nitrogen into the soil. But those are further outside of the floodplain.
Okay, there's let's see, Kat had asked, don't elderberries tolerate black walnuts?
Yes.
Okay. And Carla asked, or says, we are just starting an organic elderberry farm. What products, berries, frozen or dehydrated, do you recommend that we start to sell?
I'll start, Andrea, and then you can take over. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
I would say that the highest value elderberry product, particularly this at this time, is elderberry syrup. It depends if you want to go to the trouble to get a certified kitchen to produce that. I don't remember if you are the person that's in Virginia, but you'd want to look into your state laws. It's actually not difficult to get that in Pennsylvania. I don't know what Virginia's cottage kitchen laws are. Drying can work well because you can market commercially mountain rose herbs. If you're producing a lot of elderberries, you might want to look into mountain rose herbs. I would say that every reputable quality herb supplier in the United States of America runs out of dried elderberries and has still an enormous demand for them. You also might consider doing pick your own, depending on your location, because a lot of people really are interested in making their own elderberry syrup products, that's something to think about. Freezing, they work frozen. I like them a lot. I store them for our use, our household use, but freezing can be kind of problematic. You really want to have a good system so that they don't get freezer burned, and you need to have the room to do that. So that's not, I wouldn't go to frozen as my first commercial venture. I would do either dried or value added as syrup.
Yeah, I agree with Sarah. The winery in town here, they buy fresh elderberries from me. They don't want it to be boiled because they're making wine with it, and they want a lot of the living enzymes to still be present. If you go to some of these forums on social media, there's so many people who are selling elderberry syrup who aren't even growing their own elderberries, and they're just looking for dried elderberries. And the berries are selling, depending on the time of the year, around $15 a pound or so. Then the syrup, I've seen, $15 for a few ounces. And it, it really depends on, finding a really good recipe is the first thing you want to do. Find something that you like. Some people also make elderberry gummy bears, or like cough drop gummies, they call them. I don't really know. I wrote a grant for a local hemp fiber grower for a mobile hemp seed drying facility, and we got $60,000. So he's able to actually dry our elderberries with his innovative farmer technologies. Try to find friends and neighbors that are machinists and can fasten for you the type of versatile equipment that you might need. Try to find wineries, try to find other growers. I know Lancaster Pharmacy has some really interesting models where they have a CSA share of medicinal products and sell through their CSA. I really like the pick your own model as well.
Or if there's a local farmer's market, you could sell quart containers of berry clusters, probably. Depending where you are, you'd probably be cleaned out every market, I would think.
There's also a pretty lively market for just selling cuttings of your elderberry bushes. Especially if you get into growing cultivars, you can sell cuttings for people to grow as live stakes. I've seen them. It's pretty lucrative. It's like $5 for 4 little sticks. And if you're pruning anyway, that's another value-added product that, is right there at your fingertips.
Andrea, Carl had asked if you don't happen to have a video of the destemmer available, do you?
I do, yeah. I'll put it back up on my Instagram page. Yeah, I have a video, and I took it down because we are sort of reinventing our model. But yeah, Ironwood Forestry on Instagram, or ironwoodforestry.guru is my website. I do have a video. We demonstrated it at the PASA conference, Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture, over the wintertime. We invented the machine in December, so we sort of missed the window on using it with raw, fresh elderberries. So we used it with with frozen elderberries. So it didn't really feel like it was like an completely accurate demonstration. But you can also look up the University of Missouri. There's all sorts of cooperatives, elderberry cooperatives out there. There are, thousands of acres of elderberries for production. I guess one of the main pests for elderberries, which fortunately we haven't seen up here, there's a fruit fly that can be a real pain to deal with. So there's some aronia at Annie's farm and that alley cropping method. A lot of the elderberries for production are planted in alley cropping, where the trees and shrubs are planted in rows, and as they're growing, the alleyways in between, you're either doing vegetables or cut flowers or pollinator species. Yeah, so alley cropping is another method, another type of an agroforestry practice.
This is a mature black cohosh. Black cohosh is one of the plants I was talking about in the first video. So this is when they grow up. This is probably a second or third year black cohosh plant. Angelica, which is also a native species. This is what it looks like this time of year. You'll see it around. Some people confuse it with the false hemlock, which is a very poisonous plant. I don't think it really looks too similar, but I could see the confusion, or with the wild parsnip, but it's not. This is Angelica, and it is a medicinal species and a native. There we are with our friend Annie Pawpaw.
We were so little then.
I know, we were so young.
That was January of 2018.
Yeah.
Right before we planted the elderberries.
Yep. And there we're doing live staking with Andrea on another site.
There is 3,000 bare root seedlings, trees I got from Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm working on a 3D printed tree tube made out of biodegradable filament because I hate plastics, but there's a lot of it that we use.
Yeah.
There's our friend Sabina and Tom. I don't know if Sabina's still on the call. Sabina runs the Pennsylvania Cut Flower Growers Network, and I learned a lot from Sabina on different species that she can integrate into her cut flower business. There's Sabina.
Hi, Sabina.
She's on mute.
Hey, I'm out in the garden, so
Nice.
listening on my headphones.
Cool.
How's the Cut Flower Growers Network? Are you guys able to do some organizing? I know it's been difficult with whether you're essential or not this year, right?
Well, we're sort of more focused on, well, personally, I'm more focused on food right now, but yes, cut flowers were not considered essential. So at one point, there was some issue getting flowers to people. But now that everything's back open, cut flowers are back in the game. So yeah, huge demand right now.
Flowers are important. Flowers
Food for the soul, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we're seeing a huge demand for local flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Have you, are you ready for some more trees and shrubs?
These are the flowers of the mature black cohosh. Wow. You see.
Right now, no.
Yeah.
Happy June.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I meant September. Yeah.
Yeah, September, yes.
Good. Yeah, I'm really excited about continuing to network with the cut flowers growers network across the state. I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
Andrea, Josh had a question. Do you ever cover crop an area before buffer installation? Is excess nitrogen runoff still a worry if it is not mowed, or is cover cropping unnecessary?
We call it in conservation a conservation cover. So Ernst Seeds in Pennsylvania, they have riparian buffer mixes. So we're doing a variety of different seed mixes that basically are the equivalent of a perennial pollinator cover crop, I guess you would say. We're going to be doing that at the Garrison Winograd property in their riparian buffer. Yeah, nitrogen and phosphorus are pretty major concerns. What I try to do is plant nitrogen fixing trees and shrubs upland away from the immediate buffer. So nitrogen fixing trees would be black locust and alder, redbuds, not honey locust. They're not nitrogen fixing. Sometimes people think that they are. But integrating silvopasture, a controlled grazing model is one way that some people are reducing phosphorus in their buffers. There's also the Stroudwater Research Center has an ag BMP that they've resurrected from the 1920s called a level lip spreader, which is basically a swale. But yeah, most of the species that we're seed drilling into the buffers are perennial pollinator native species like milkweed and butterfly weed and yarrow. But check out Ernst Seed, ERNST. They have seed mixes. They have a pre-mixed riparian buffer mix. It's $20 a pound, and they recommend 30 pounds per acre. And there's a variety of different seed mixes there.
Here you can see how well the elder grow under the black walnut. They don't mind a bit.
There's some of those special violets from my mom that are growing at Sarah's. They're knee high. Edible, medicinal. Sarah healed my mother with a violet recommendation when nothing else was making her feel better earlier this year.
Your mom's the violet lady.
Here's another aspect of multifunctional buffers. You can sort of see some of the hardwood and softwood species that do well with growing mushrooms. So you can, not all of those trees are native. I just grabbed this from online, but you know, if you have some aspens, let's say, you know, you have some extra hickory that you're pruning, you can, oh, look, I can grow shiitake. So just keep mushroom in your bonnet in terms of multifunctional opportunities as well. I think that's it.
Cool.
Great. All right. I think we've got through all the, yeah, no more questions in the queue, and I don't see any in the chat box. So I think you guys got through them all. Thank you both so much for running through this with us. It was an incredible presentation. I can't thank you both enough for that.
That was fun. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will, for all those who are attending, we'll make the link available when I get the recording available. We'll post it online, and then any of the resources that Andrea and Sarah had mentioned. We'll include those as well, so you have everything in one place to go. So thank you everyone again for joining us. We hope to do another one of these in the near future. It would be great to be back outside with everyone, but in the meantime, we'll find this to be a method that we get to share some great information from folks like Sarah and Andrea. So thanks again.
Yeah.
Okay, take care everyone.